Thanks.
We are recording. Want to kick us off, Luke?
Oh, yeah, I was.
Yeah, or did you want to? I didn't know if you wanted to.
No, it's fine. Today's Thursday, May 21st. We're having a block producer meeting here for the FIO Protocol, and we're going to be talking about releases we have coming up, as well as the fee system, and making sure that the block producers are clear on how the fee system works. It's going to be really important as the token price gets listed in the future and has fluctuations in the price. We've got to make sure that the chain is being protected as far as the fees, because that is the mechanism for protecting the chain as far as the resource usage on chain. So it's very important that, as the price of token fluctuates, we can keep those fees reasonable so that the people using the chain for utility can find value in it. And so we're just going to overview what those processes are today, plus some changes that we have coming in the future, and some bug fixes as well. So I think that's it. Go ahead and take it away, Eric.
All right, let me share my screen real quick here. All right, is that working? You see the releases page here? So I was just going to review some upcoming releases. We've been letting mainnet marinate for a bit since we launched, but we starting to build up some features and a few bug fixes that we want to get out there. So I think most of you maybe have seen the 1.0.3. That's this fee. It's a fix for fees. Actually, fee setting hasn't been working. If you're setting ratios or multipliers, it probably wasn't working. And we actually updated that to have a threshold of 15. But I think Pablo's going to review the fee pieces there. I think that got approved this morning. I think that went through. So now it should start working. And we're going to be looking for the BPs to actually doing some Clio calls to set fees so we can test that out. And we would like to get over that 15 vote threshold to test that out in testnet as well. And then we'll be rolling it out to mainnet, where we're actually going to want to, talk about the fees and set the fees there. So that's the one that's in play right now. The next one actually does address some of the FIPs that we've been rolling out. This one does FIP 2, 3, and 4. FIP 2 being the endpoints with paging. So the FIPs page is out here as well. So if I go to that, it's good to review this one. It doesn't include the FIP 1 for the transfer of FIO domains and addresses. That's actually been getting requested a lot, but it involves one of the tables has to be altered a bit. So it's going to involve a table migration, which is a little more complex. So we bundled that into its own release. That'll probably be a 1.2 release. So the 1.1 release is going to include the FIP 2, which is the paging, the FIP 3, which is the ability to cancel requests for funds. So if you send a request now for funds, you can't cancel it yourself. And then FIP 4, which is the ability to remove addresses that you've mapped. Right now you can zero them out and kind of monkey with it, but we wanted to add calls to specifically be able to remove either all of your mapped addresses or a few mapped addresses. So that's coming among other items there. Just go out and review the release notes for the more details, because there is some other stuff that's been discussed, some of the support for PubK1, at least on some of the get calls and the ability to pass that in. So that's a limited support for PubK1 prefix that's been talked about, some updates to EOS.io as well. So any questions? The timing of those, so we have the 1.0.3 in play in testnet right now. I'm hoping to get the 1.1 into testnet maybe early next week as well. And I'm hoping we can get the 1.0.3 in the mainnet very soon as well. So as soon as that gets a little bit, if we can get everyone, if we got 15 VPs to actually do their fee setting and get that tested out, we can roll that out to mainnet as soon as we can. So
sorry, PubK1 is for the prefix of a public key.
Yeah. So just kind of allowing that to get, again, we don't do a full support for that. It's a limited support. And Casey, are you on? Do you remember what the extent of this one was?
Yeah, it was just for those 4 calls that are listed below. And basically it's just a prefix replacement. So it's just taking in the string of what we have already with the FIO prefix and replaces it with the PubK1. Very, small change. Doesn't take very many resources. Pretty easy.
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So any other questions on releases? If not, let's roll into the fee setting, which is the bulk of what we wanted to discuss here to get everyone more involved and And that's going to get more important as we get into if, when FIO gets listed on an exchange, we're going to need to be a lot more proactive on how we respond to changes in FIO pricing in the market with our fees. So, Pavo, did you want to try and share, or can I just share the Dev Hub? So to start, there's two places where you can find fee setting. Always, the knowledge base is out there. There's a page on fee setting and distribution, gives an overview of fees. And then there's the Dev Hub here. Again, this gets into a little more technical detail and probably what we'll be reviewing today. Under being a block producer link here, there's a setting fees. And Pavo, is this do you want me to allow you to share, or can I just show this, or what were you going to review?
Yeah, that's what I was going to review. I can share so I can kind of move around this screen.
You want me to share? Then let me do. Also, I need to enable.
And I wanted to clarify too, as far as the fees go, the foundation, obviously doesn't control this. This is really up to you guys. You guys are going to define, what the fee should be, because ultimately it's, it's costing you resources on your equipment, right? If those fees are too low, the block log, the state log, all these things start to get really expensive over time. And if they're too low, it's clearly an attack vector. So, we've kind of worked with Dapix as a service provider to kind of figure out what makes sense as far as the initial kind of manufacturer retail price, suggested retail price of about $2 a year for a domain or for an address, and about $40 a year for a domain. Now, obviously, that $40 is not related to state costs, which most of our fees, almost all of our fees, are directly connected to, we're trying to make them as cheap as possible related to the actual resource on chain that they use. But the domain one is more kind of that's a marketing thing in a sense, or it's kind of like an exclusive thing. Having a domain is an exclusive thing, and there's high demand for that. So it makes sense as far as the revenue generation for the chain to make that one more expensive beyond just what the actual state costs are. And similar in some regards to an address as well. So we've done surveys with hundreds of people.
In most industries, you would call that a vanity domain.
There you go. Yeah, vanity domain is a great way to put it. And so the fees are for the address registration and domain registration are not just kind of finger in the air, but they're also based on surveys we've done with the community and what people are willing to pay when we describe what the functionality would be, and we think they're reasonable. But ultimately, it's again up to the block producers to decide, and it's also up to the block producers as the token price fluctuates how tightly they want to maintain that kind of US dollar perceived value of $2 to $40. Like I know I've been a block producer on Steam and Hive, for example, and there's a price feed that has to be maintained. And there are differing opinions on how often that should be maintained. Some people do it daily, some people do it hourly, some people do it based on a percentage threshold of change, where when it changes more than 1% or so of what it was, then they update it. And I wanted to point out that when we make recommendations going forward, we're hoping that each and every individual BP evaluates this from their own perspectives and comes up with their own approach, because everyone does the exact same thing. You don't get this kind of resilient distributed perspective on what the prices should be, which is what we're ultimately going for by having multiple block producers that eventually come to consensus. So I want to kind of outline that a little bit, basically saying you guys are in control of the fees, and hopefully you'll change them with discussions, including the foundation and the community, in a way that makes sense to everybody.
All right. Thanks, Luke. So I'll review the kind of technical aspect of how fee setting is implemented. So at a high level, there are basically two concepts to set the fee. There is what we call a fee ratio and a fee multiplier. So, and the reason we did that is because we wanted to make it easy for BPs to be able to adjust the fees as the rate of exchange of the token fluctuates. So one approach could have been, okay, here's just a list of fees and submit the actual FIO token value for every fee, and if you want to change it, resubmit it for every single endpoint, right? But we wanted to be a little bit more efficient and said, okay, well, you can first determine the ratios, meaning what should be the difference between a FIO address and a FIO domain registration or a renewal or any other call. And then you have a multiplier, which basically once multiplied by the ratio amount, gets you a SUF value, which is SUF is the lowest, smallest unit of FIO. It's basically 1 billion SUFs in a FIO. And this way you can always in the future just update the multiplier as rate of exchange fluctuates. So the way you can set those ratios in what is the denominator, if you will, or the scale of that is really up to you. What we do recommend that kind of makes sense in how you can kind of think about the fees is you basically pick any currency you want to be thinking about in terms of fees. Let's say it's US dollar, right? And you are going to say, okay, I think a FIO domain should cost $40, right? And you basically take 40 and then you add a 9 zeros to the end, and that basically is your fee ratio for that particular domain. And then you say, well, for that particular fee. And then I want register FIO address to be $2 equivalent. You say 2, and then you add 9 zeros to the end. And if you do it that way, when you set the multiplier, you basically take the rate of exchange of that particular currency, so in this case, USD, and you divide it by how many tokens, FIO tokens go into that one unit of currency. So we basically say, we assume that one FIO is trading currently at 5 cents, and we take $1 divided by 5 cents, and that gives us 20. So we basically set the multiplier to 20. And if you do it that way, then basically this will work. This will work across any currencies. You don't have to use USDC. If you want to base your rate of exchange on some other currency, you can do that as well. And basically, once you obtain the rate of exchange, whatever it is right now, you just update that multiplier, set that multiplier. So if the rate of exchange of a FIO token goes from 5 cents to 10 cents, you basically divide 1 by how many FIO tokens in a dollar. In this case, it would be 10. You adjust your multiplier to 10, and now everything still works as it was intended.
What's the agreed oracle for this exchange rate measurement?
I wanted to comment on that a little bit. Based on how we've, for example, supported fee setting on Hive, there is no one kind of definitive, like you have to use this, right? Some people do it manually. Some people do it based on CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko APIs. Some people pull from multiple exchanges and they have their own internal criteria for thresholds of volume on those exchanges. So they'll exclude some if they are not providing a useful feed. Some people actually have complicated functions that will weight each feed that they're pulling in to come up with their oracle by different criteria. So basically, maybe this one has a lot of wash trading.
When you say some people, that means each BP can set its own oracle for this weighting?
Exactly, yes. And that's kind of the preliminary conversation that I was trying to introduce, is that for this to be a consensus-based, resilient, kind of distributed, order out of chaos of sorts perspective on what these fees should be, we do need individual conscious decisions. Every individual BP that makes their own unique decision and perspective on this adds an element of value to the robustness and distributed nature of this calculated value. So if everyone did the exact same thing, you'd not have a very evolutionary stable strategy. You'd have a situation where if one exchange, let's say one exchange was the only exchange, everyone uses it and they update it every hour or every day, let's say. Well, if everybody knew that, one, they could take out that exchange API or something and now the price feeds get broken, or they can actually manipulate the price within that day and actually, attack the chain for a period of time, knowing that all the BPs aren't going to update it for another 23 hours, right? So
right. I mean, the more everyone is lemming, like the easier it is for me to game the system.
Exactly. Yep. And that's the beauty of consensus. And really that's kind of the beauty of delegated proof of stake is you have these individual actors. You don't have, hundreds of them, but you have enough. You've got 21 independent actors and they can all be replaced at any time, almost in real time. And you get 2/3 + 1 and you get a nice answer.
And the contract actually uses the median, right? Or is it average or?
Yeah, so let me talk about that. So, so once those FIO ratios and multipliers are set, basically the fee is going to be the multiplier times the ratio, and that becomes what the BP, a particular single BP, is voting on, right? So, so in this case, if we have this number times 20, you're basically saying, okay, this BP is voting that the registered FIO domain should be 40 FIO. And now every other BP is going to submit their own vote in terms of what they think that should be. And once there are 15 votes for any one endpoint that have been submitted, and this is actually a modification that's coming online as Eric described, along with another fix to the fee voting. But once that's in place, you will basically need 15 votes on each endpoint in order for those votes to become effective. Otherwise, meaning if just a single BP is voting on register FIO domain and nobody else is voting, then that vote will not count, and whatever is the default that has been set initially will be in effect. So you need at least 15 BPs voting. Once you have 15 BPs voting, you're correct. Then basically the system will derive a median of all those votes, and that will be the amount of fee that is set. And then every time a multiplier is submitted by a BP or fees are submitted by a BP, that median gets recalculated.
Okay, you just called those votes, but they're not votes for a BP. These are bids by a BP for a price.
Correct. We call them fee votes. You're right. They're definitely not BP votes.
Yeah, it's a bad terminology in a voting system. Yeah.
Yeah. You can call them bids. Yeah, maybe that's a better way of saying it.
And the threshold you were talking about, that's per fee, right? It's not
Yes.
All fees need 15 and then it kicks on. It's
correct. Yes.
Okay.
So technically speaking, a BP can vote on just one fee, right? So if you look at the code, when you submit fee ratios, you basically specify every endpoint and the ratio for that endpoint. There's no validation as to, did you vote on, bid on every one of those fees or not. So technically speaking, you can, let's say, only submit a fee ratio for a single endpoint. Now, we do not recommend that. We recommend that every BP is constantly bidding on every single endpoint and not just select a few of them. And the threshold is evaluated on every single endpoint. So one endpoint might have.
And again, let me just ask, because I'm pedantic about these things. Endpoint in this case means some specific action that the BP will take. So it's an API endpoint, but it's an action performed by the BP that they are making a bid to perform. Correct?
Well, I would say it's a capability of the blockchain protocol itself. So they're not just BP actions, but these are every contract on the FIO blockchain is a system contract. There are no user contracts. So everything you could do on the chain, because we've eliminated the
Sure. But
so,
the terminology endpoint typically means a node.
It's an API endpoint. So I'm
right. Well, it's an API call.
Gotcha. Yep.
It's not an API node, which would be an API endpoint. Sorry to be a pain in the ass about this, but it's
John. No, this is exactly the kind of stuff. I know you have a lot of experience, building networks on continents, and I really appreciate your perspective. Like we want to make this as we want to make this as clean as possible. And those type of changes, semantic changes that we can make as early as possible, disrupt the fewest number of people. So if there's value changing some of these things early on, but of course, this would be a new breaking change that would have to go in the future if we were to change, that from endpoint to, and it also kind of highlights a concern we've been discussing about the difference between the EOSIO perspective, which is generally thinking in terms of contracts and actions, and kind of the non-EOSIO world that's just going to think in terms of an SDK and an API. So they're going to be like, hey, what? And an endpoint is a language I've used for a long time, probably a decade. When I think of APIs, REST APIs, I think of endpoints. I don't think of nodes, right? So I personally think it's an okay terminology, but I appreciate that there are going to be different perspectives on it.
And that's fine. I'm an anti-REST, anti-API kind of beast to start with. So
I should send you some essays I've done on REST. That'd be great. All right, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, another question. So when it comes to when a block producer votes on the endpoints, if it doesn't vote for the whole set of endpoints, is that classed as a zero vote or a zero cost or what have you? When it comes to calculating the median, or is it just discarded?
Yeah, no. Basically their bid will not be participating, and so essentially, if you don't get 2/3 plus 1, 15 bids for a given endpoint, it will continue to default to the initial state when it was introduced. So for example, why this is important, if we introduce a new feature, which we absolutely will do many times in the future, it will at start have no consensus from the block producers. So at the point of initiation of a new endpoint, a new feature that the API and SDK has, that will have whatever initial value we agree to set it with on start. And it'll stay there until you reach 15 actual independent votes. So what will happen most likely, every time we roll out new features, we will highlight a new fee that feature has. And the FIPS, if you read them, there's sections that talk about additional fees. And we're going to ask the block producers to then go vote. Because until they do, it's just the default vote. Now, they may set it to what the recommended value is, and that's fine, but we're still going to ask for that so that it's actually in control of the BPs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, in short, though, it's not counted as zero. You're just not, if there's 15 votes for for one of the API calls and you haven't voted, you're just not counted in that median calculation.
Okay, so it's not like, you vote for 2 or 3 different endpoints out of the suite of 9, for example, and the other 6 endpoints you've not voted for, you're just not part of that calculation there.
You're not part of that median calculation.
Cool, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Right.
And again, we encourage everybody.
You still participate and earn at that median level by performing those endpoint actions.
Sure.
Well, users, when they call those calls, there's a fee associated with it. And those fees, yeah, this has nothing to do with how those fees get allocated. This is just the setting of the fee for what those cost for users to call a registered FIO domain, for example.
Right, got it, good.
Yeah.
And again, we encourage everybody, all the BPs, to be voting on all of the endpoints or actions that are out there. And as we introduce new endpoints, we will be, asking BPs to start including those new endpoints in setting the fees as well. Right. So,
and the BPs have implicitly voted on those default fees when they approve the contract changes.
Exactly.
To implement it in the first place.
Exactly.
So there's no conflict of any sort here.
Yep.
Yeah, that initial set fee was the default, right? So I guess by approving that, the initial fee was approved. I think one thing's important too, Pavo, with those ratios is the expectation is you would not need to be changing those that much. The ratios establish just what it says, the ratio between those different values, right? It's that multiplier that we would expect to be fluctuating and changing more. So you may only set it, if you're comfortable with 40, whatever you may call it, 40 FIO for a, compared to 2 for a register address, for 40 for a register domain, and that ratio, so what is that? That's 20 times, the ratio. Then if you're comfortable with that going forward, then you never really need to update that. Even if the price of FIO fluctuates, you don't necessarily need to change those. That's important to understand.
Yeah,
I think it's also important to highlight why it's required for you to submit your bid for these fees, because if you don't do that and you're like, yeah, all those numbers on the default, that's fine. Then you don't have the ability to respond by making a single call to your multiplier when the token price fluctuates in a way that you're no longer okay with the allocated in FIO, the amount that it costs in the external world's token, right? And that's
Well,
where it's important to set it.
So in the case where we have 20 BPs who use different multipliers, some based on US dollar, I might be based on Korean won, you might be based on Bitcoin, he might be based on Ethereum, you know, some other guy wants it in EOS. We could all have different multipliers, and so that sort of spot evaluation of the median means that that evaluator needs to have some way to rationalize those different multipliers to each other. So there's some oracle for that as well, presumably.
Well, that is based on research of, you know, one with, and there's a spreadsheet that we use prior to setting all these fees, which I want to share with the team that talks through actual, as best we could, you know, CPU bandwidth.
No, I think he's asking a different question, Luke. I think if I understood it correctly, I mean.
Well, let me finish my thought and make sure I'm answering it. So it's the idea that the resources that are actually used define the ratios, meaning if there's X resources used for this call and this call is 10 times more
that has
expensive.
nothing to do with what I was asking.
All right, then David, go ahead and clarify because I misunderstood.
So your question was around how the ultimate median is calculated, correct? For the how the
Correct.
median, right. So correct me if I'm wrong, Pablo, but the median is calculated based on the median of the FIO token amount, not any fiat or other benchmark amount. So ultimately, it's based on if you put in, you know, 20 FIO as your ratio or 10 FIO as your ratio. It's what's the median of that number that's entered, right, Pablo?
Well, it's so the ratio and the multiplier is used to derive a fee in FIO tokens, right? So it doesn't really matter how you set those ratios and the multipliers at the end of the day, because you're basically taking the ratio for a registered domain, multiplying it by the multiplier, and it says you want the fee to be 800 FIO. Now, how you derive that at this point is irrelevant. Another BP might say, okay, it's 600 FIO, I want that, and you know the median will be picked.
So let me state this a different way. So me as BP1, I say I want this endpoint fee to be, you know, 21, so it has to be, you know, 20 FIO for that. And the other guy says he wants it, you know, 0.000001 Bitcoin, and he has his own oracle that determines how many FIO that is.
Exactly.
And so his multiplier in his oracle results in a number of FIO, and we use those FIO only to calculate the median.
Exactly.
Okay, great. That's perfect.
Yeah, the FIO blockchain only transacts and knows FIO. You know, it doesn't know anything else.
Yeah, but the BP, the multiplier means that there's a per BP implicit oracle involved in that calculation, and that's fine. It's per BP. They can set it whatever.
Exactly.
Yep. All right, so the last thing I'll add is in terms of kind of what it is from a functionality standpoint that exists today, what will be pushed in this new fix, and kind of what the BPs should be doing in the short term. So the ability to set the fee ratios and set the fee multiplier is out there on the on mainnet. It functions, and we encourage all of the BPs to submit their votes, you know, as soon as they can. Now, there is a bug that is being corrected in this next release that that Eric described, that actually prevents the setting of the fee. So even if all the votes are there, they will not be counted until this fix is put in. And also in that release, there's going to be the 15 minimum threshold that's going to be there. So if the BPs vote today, have all of them, and when the fix is pushed out, it will automatically basically start counting those bids.
So Pablo, I think that fix got approved this morning in testnet. So if they vote in testnet, it should count with the 15 threshold, and it should be recorded.
Yeah, but I'm saying on mainnet.
Mainnet,
that
yeah, on mainnet
yeah.
this won't work right now. You're correct.
Right, but it will not compute it. But the BPs can still set those ratios. So on this page on DevHub, we actually have sample calls that have the exact fees that are currently in effect. So you can kind of use that as a starting point. There is one for API, and there's also a Clio example to set the fees to exactly how we describe it, to be exactly what they are right now. So your votes are counted, and similarly for the multiplier. So we encourage all VPs to start voting both on testnet and mainnet, and hopefully our release comes out quickly and fixes the issue.
Or start bidding, as we should say. Right?
Yes, bidding.
Like
sorry. All right. Any questions?
I've got a question. I'm still at a loss, and I imagine a lot of block producers will be, to develop some sort of methodology to justify our bids. What would you recommend just as a starting point for that? The safe answer is just trust the foundation, but I would like to be a little bit smarter than that and actually have some kind of rationale. Right now I have none whatsoever.
Yeah, the starting point is don't fuck with it and then watch it.
Yeah.
So-
Now, Roman, that's a really great question. And I think, I don't know if we've shared this already, Pavo, so we did with Todd, who did a great job of kind of, and we worked with you guys as well, Roman, with Crypto Alliance and also with Block Trades to kind of figure out attack vectors for the chain prior to launch. And we have a spreadsheet internally that kind of makes, obviously makes assumptions, but it kind of thinks through all the different ways that if you were to do this, if you were to spend, $50,000 in FIO tokens, buying up FIO to run this command as often as you possibly can, and we calculate out, what does that do to the chain? How does that impact the block log? How does that impact the state file? How does that, how much CPU and bandwidth is going to be needed? How much RAM are you going to need on those servers? And we started calculating it out and tried our best to back that into, what's that actually going to cost a block producer? What type of hardware are they going to have to run to deal with that? And then how much of that information is in state for how long? So for example, some calls, they last for 12 months, right? And then if they don't pay the fee again, then it gets removed from the state file, for example. So I would like to, and we have discussed this internally as a team, creating that as a tool of sorts that the block producers can tinker with, right? Like not just a spreadsheet maybe, but even a spreadsheet where they could mess with it and say, okay, well, based on my threshold of hardware costs that I'm willing to, invest in FIO with as a block producer, let me figure out what I think is reasonable. Because clearly, eventually, this becomes potentially something where the block producers compete with each other and say, hey, well, I can provide cheaper resources than you, so I'm going to vote that this be a little bit less, right? I generally don't think that's going to happen. Like for example, on the Hive blockchain, there's an account creation fee that in a similar way, all the different witnesses do a bid for, and that directly impacts how much state that they have to keep track of, because the more accounts are created, the more everything gets expensive because that's permanent on chain forever. So I think I'm hoping we can maybe Eric or Pavo, we could maybe provide that spreadsheet and maybe do another call or just talk through, or we could pull it up now and kind of explain kind of our rationale for how we got here. And then I would love to see that as an ongoing conversation where the BPs could actually debate and say, you know what, I think this fee is too high or this fee is too low. We really need to bump it up, and then also think through whatever you do impacts all the FIO members and partners, right? Because they're running campaigns and they're doing different things. And if it's too expensive, for example, to interact with it by getting a FIO address, that's going to hinder adoption, right? So there's all these different things to think through. Of course, the foundation is doing addressed giveaways as well. There's 12.5% of the tokens set aside for that. So there's many different pieces that go into setting a good fee.
Hey, Luke, I think there's another aspect of the question that was asked there that you didn't cover, but to answer it, can you pause the recording for a minute?
One second, David. Let me pause that.
All right, cool.
Back recording.
Yeah.
I mean, Luke, I could share that. I could just do a quick share of that spreadsheet we were talking about. I like that idea. Maybe putting this into more of like a JavaScript tool or something like that that could be played with as well. But I think
Yeah, and-
Eric, before you share, because it does get kind of a little complex, I don't think we have enough time in this call to kind of review that spreadsheet. And I still would like to mention another element of setting the fee, which is very much related to this, which is the bundled transactions. So there is a separate function that the BPs have that allows them to set how many bundled transaction a new FIO address gets. So currently that number is 100. So every FIO address gets 100 bundled transactions. There are certain fees. If you look at our knowledge base, you will basically find in the setting of fees, there is a listing that kind of shows you which transactions are eligible for a bundle and which aren't. So for example, if you're adding a pub address to your FIO address, you would pay currently 0.6 FIO tokens for that. But if you have a bundle transaction, it will basically decrement one bundle transaction from your count. And that's important because if you think about it, when you're setting the ratios and you're saying, okay, a registered FIO address has a certain number of bundle transactions, and then those transactions actually have a cost as well, you always kind of want to make sure you think through the math on that so that you don't, because if you say, oh, a FIO address should have 1,000 bundle transactions, then you're effectively lowering the cost of all those other fees that now can be called using bundle transactions. So that kind of also goes into the math of the fees. And there is a call that is a far simpler call, which is called submit bundle transaction, which is basically, again, a vote of the BPs to indicate going forward how many bundle transactions should be included in every new FIO address that is being registered. And there's kind of following the same concept. Every BP gets a vote or a bid, and then once 15 is reached, which is that change is actually going to be pushed out with the release that Eric described today. It doesn't require that 15 limit. It's basically deriving a median of all those bids, and it's saying, okay, here's going to be the number of bundle transactions that will be awarded to every new FIO address. But again, you kind of have to think through that. This is very important for all the BPs to understand. You kind of have to think through bundle transactions in relation to the fees, because otherwise it can get out of whack, and it may be more for an attacker beneficial to buy a FIO address and renew it multiple times to get a lot of bundle transactions and then use that instead of paying the individual fee. So it's important that that is always considered. And again, we encourage all of the PPs to constantly be submitting those bundled transaction votes. And again, we have examples on the DevHub of how to do that, both in the API and a clear format.
And I want to clarify too, whatever the median is set at, when someone does a FIO address registration, that's what their account will be set to. So if today it's 100 and then you guys change it and it's 150 tomorrow, the guy who gets a domain tomorrow gets 100, or an address tomorrow gets 150, but the other guy still is stuck with 100. Is that correct, Pavel?
Correct.
Okay, and then also too, Roman, I really, really appreciate your question. I'm so glad you asked it. I really want to validate that question because I felt the same way when the Steemit company rolled out the resource credit system. It was very complex, very overwhelming, very confusing. And it was clear that they had, I mean, there were multiple gigantic long pages, and it's like, well, clearly you guys thought about this a whole lot, but it was very difficult. I mean, it was like 3 or 4 pages of like crazy equations and math and stuff. And it was like, holy moly, how am I as a witness supposed to figure out what this actually means, as far as how am I going to be educated to make a good, important, informed decision? And it was always a little bit challenging to wrap my head around the resource credit system. And essentially there hasn't been many changes in that ecosystem to those values, even though they could be set individually. And I know BitShares does a similar thing where you set fees on each and every one, and it's a vote. So my hope is this is just the first introductory conversation to an ongoing, continual conversation. that the block producers is having, and obviously the foundation would like to participate in that. But it's this is just the first step, is explaining the system, how it works, kind of starting with the voting process or the bid process, sorry, and then with that bid process, then evaluating it over time. And I think tools that you've built, Aloha, are fantastic as far as looking at resource usage over time. There's some we have some internal work that DAPIX is doing for us that is going to add additional visibility on some of the usage over time. And I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation where we get to answer that question, Roman, where we can actually start evaluating things based on real actual data on chain and actual server usage, and say, hey guys, with the FIO token price where it's at and the amount of usage we're getting, we can make some different decisions. We might go, man, the token price is doing really well. I'm totally fine spinning up more clusters of servers. Let's get this mass adoption going. Let's lower these prices maybe. I don't know. This is an ongoing conversation that we're going to have, because it might be fine to have to pay a lot in hardware if you're getting well rewarded for it. But again, that's a conversation that we have to have continually.
Luke, do you mind if I add one more thing on bundled transactions?
Yeah, go for it.
One really important thing about these is that when somebody uses a bundled transaction, it decrements a counter in the table. And when they are charged a fee, that's additional contract actions, internal actions, where there's transfers and fees go into the foundation and all this stuff. So when somebody uses a bundled transaction, it's significantly less RAM. So we want to incentivize that as well. So right now, I think the bundled transactions are priced just below the renewal, or I think it costs less to renew than to run the number of bundled transactions, and that's kind of an incentive to keep the RAM down as well. So I just wanted to point that out. It's that affects the economics of it as well.
Great point, Todd. And that's Todd, who is speaking, does a lot of DevOps for us, and has really, he kind of helped modify the model to look at the attack surface of this. And I highly encourage you guys to communicate with him more on these topics.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Has anyone run through, say, gamed out a straw man where an exchange or two decides that they want to go in and run FIO BPs as loss leaders and come in and significantly underbid the price point on things? What effect does that have?
That's a great question. No, it's a great question. I think there are a couple there's a lot of game theory scenarios, and obviously, if you guys have been following the space, with DPoS and what's happened with Steam and Hive, it's been an interesting test of DPoS and this kind of 2/3+1 consensus model for deciding.
I would say, by interesting, it means there were a lot of unexpected, pretty horrible failures.
Well, I mean, that's one perspective for, but I mean, as someone who was directly involved in that for the last 2 months, I'm actually very encouraged, honestly. What happened with Hive is amazing. And I don't want to get off on a side tangent, but the idea that the community, the layer zero that actually cares about the value.
Right. I love what's happened with Hive. It's been a disaster in EOS mainnet.
Oh, with EOS, yeah, EOS mainnet, and I've had some great conversations with Yves and others, for example, who I think there's a lot of perspectives on how much of a disaster. For example, code changes are still being deployed. The network itself is still functioning adequately from certain perspectives. There are design problems with the staking, obviously, and so apps are not able to function. But I don't know that that's related necessarily to the technical competency of the block producers, for example. But John, I would love to continue that conversation with you, because I think it's an important one, and we're obviously going to learn from not just EOS mainnet, but all the EOS.io chains that are participating in these kind of experiments. But the point I wanted to bring up specifically about the example that was mentioned is FIO's a little bit different in that we are embracing the idea, and this took me a while to wrap my head around. When I first started consulting for DAPIX early on and thinking through this, is the idea that we are a consortium. We are actually an industry-led consortium. And what I mean by that is that the exchanges, the wallets, the payment gateways, the major players in the industry are going to directly eventually have a massive stake in this system. And they're going to want to have a level of influence based on that risk and that skin in the game. And so from that perspective, it's the idea that it's in their best interest, unlike any other DBoS chain, to keep the thing running at high optimum level because it's directly integrated into their products and services. That is their primary business model. And that I think is a very unique thing that doesn't exist in these other models. Meaning, for example, I'm an exchange, I integrate FIO directly into my deposit and withdrawal situation, greatly reduces my support costs. Everyone loves it. It's a great experience. It's across every protocol, every chain, super nice. But then I don't run a good BP. And my other, people don't run a good BP, and all of a sudden the network starts failing, and there's, missed rounds and missed blocks. All of a sudden people start complaining, saying this experience is not what it should be, and it's impacting my bottom line of revenue for my primary business. That I think is an additional incentive. So if they were to do a loss leader example, I don't know that it would directly impact the performance of the chain. What it may impact is non-consortium based block producers. And that is a concern I've tried to make very clear to all my friends that I brought on board to say, hey guys, I don't know how long it's going to be before the big players, come in and say, hey, this is amazing. We want to run the thing. And this is why we've offered, although it was contentious early on, the possibility that you all could be service providers, for example, for those exchanges, wallets, and payment gateways, because their primary mode of excellence is not running an EOS.IO based block producer. It is for the people on this call, in my opinion. So that's why we've made that a thing, even though it's a little concerning, because obviously if you're a block producer running multiple nodes, that's a problem. So it's one that really we're going to have to evaluate as time goes on and try to set good standards in place as the foundation and as well as a precedent for block producers, what we expect on chain. Eventually, we're going to have FIO running as a full DAC with a constitution and everything. So they will be voting for participation in that DAC. And hopefully we're going to have a lot more ability to set the vision for what we believe FIO should be, and an ability to essentially point out when someone's not following that vision, even if that's an exchange, for example. It's a really good question. It's one that we're going to answer together over time.
Do we want to use the remaining few minutes to have Ed kind of talk about what he's working on?
Yeah, let's do that because that's directly related, Pavo, with the Oracle research he's doing, and he sent out some questions to the Telegram. So Ed, is there anything that could help jumpstart that or get everyone thinking
go
about
to the GitHub. Basically, I just want to just take this time, very short time that I have, to kind of give a shout out to a new issue on the FIO GitHub. It's issue 143. It is titled "Make a Fee Multiplier Voting Tool." This is intended. This effort kind of defines a few goals that have kind of been discussed in this meeting. The first thing is we want to, DAPIX would like to try to provide a reference implementation that provides an oracle to allow block producers to flexibly select the data providers that they might interface to in order to get pricing for the FIO token, and use this tool to vote their fee multiplier. This is just one, as Luke mentioned, we want a robust and diversified set of processes and methodologies for setting these fee multipliers, but we want to provide a reference implementation that allows diversity of who you select and why and how you set your fee multiplier, so that when we do get listed on our token, we are able to provide an immediately usable tool by the block producer community so that they can adapt the fees in the protocol as needed as the token price fluctuates. Not only we want to provide an oracle, we want to provide guidelines for using this oracle, and we want to provide other reference implementations that might help to guide or guide BPs in making their own oracles that they will use eventually. We would love to encourage that diversity of oracle use. But if you just take a look at this, FIO on the GitHub, issue 143, make a fee multiplier voting tool. If you give that a good read over, hopefully that's going to be very orienting. It gives a background and motivation and all kinds of security aspects and implementation details, functional requirements, and other details that say what a reference implementation might look like. So if you take a look at that, I'd really appreciate it and give your comments.
Thanks, Ed. Any comments, immediate comments or questions for Ed on that one? I know some of you have started thinking about it, so appreciate any feedback you give on those. As with any FIPS, please. Some of these are coming through pretty fast, but we need you guys engaged. I think that's all we have then, if no one else.
Yeah, actually, for the last minute or two, just on that point, please give me feedback, because I'm kind of representing the foundation essentially on the FIP process. And there's a bunch that I'm about to approve and move forward with. There hasn't been a lot of debate or discussion. Doesn't seem to be much contention on those ones that are currently being debated. Now, obviously, the security one, we have a whole committee for that. I'm sorry, the privacy one, we have a whole committee for that. We had our first meeting, I think a week ago on Friday. So that one definitely we're going to have put a lot of thought into before we move forward. But I would highly encourage you all to participate. That you can see that Pablo has an open draft that he's making updates to FIP 5 based on that. But if any others in the FIP process, if you feel we're moving too fast, feel we're moving too slow, definitely give me feedback, because I don't want the DAPX team, for example, that the foundation is currently asking to make these changes to be waiting, right? We want to move as quickly as we can. But at the same time, we don't want to move too quickly, right? We want to get consensus on these changes. Obviously, ultimately, whatever is put out there in code, you all are going to either agree to or not on an MSIG. But ideally, of course, we want to have that conversation early on as possible as we're developing the software, and even better as we're designing what we're going to develop. So highly encourage you all as much as possible to participate in the FIP process. I will probably be having those conversations as much as possible in the FIO Telegram channel, not the FIO mainnet channel. And there's a couple of reasons for that. These FIPs impact our wallets, exchanges, and payment gateways, and they won't necessarily be in the mainnet channel. And obviously it impacts you guys as well. So, you guys won't be, you guys will be in a different thing as well. And so it's important that the FIO channel, the mainnet, not the mainnet one, but the main, Telegram FIO channel, be a place where people are discussing the protocol. It's not going to be about token price and this on the other. It's where I want people to talk about the foundation for inter-wallet operability and the protocol itself. So highly encourage you guys to participate there if you can. My daughter's very excited because her rollerblades just showed up. Okay.
All right, well, that's good timing. I think it's been an hour. Should we wrap this up then?
Yeah, I'd say there's no more time for additional questions. So if you have them, please ask them in Telegram, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.